Maybe I'll just start by giving like a higher level overview on what we want to talk about today, and then we can dive a bit deeper afterwards. But so one of the things that I'm usually interested in is like looking at an industry or just a space and thinking about where are we and where will this go? And it's always good to do it with fellow experts. In this case, it's something that we both can talk about a little bit because we'll talk about DevTools.
Yeah.
And DevTools is a very, very broad space. We could probably just talk about this specifically for like 10 hours or something. But I think we both have like our unique understandings of what we think the status quo is and what will change. And I've brought a good buddy and YC fellow of mine, Zeno, to the call. Maybe you just talk a little bit about yourself, your background, and specifically about what you're working on now. And then we can just transition into the actual topic.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks a lot, Mike, for having me. I'm really excited for this chat. Yeah, I'm Zeno, originally from Brazil, based in SF currently, and I'm the founder and CEO of Resend. We are building the Stripe of email, the Vercel of email. So we're trying to take this very old problem and approach it in a very unique way, which I think it's kind of similar to what Fastgen is doing too. So I'm definitely looking forward to dive deeper into this.
Yeah, to some degree it actually is, because everyone, like I'm Mike, CEO of Fastgen, we're building a low-code backend, a problem that like many people have tried to solve, but we, similar to you, probably think that we have found a unique way of actually approaching it and making it hopefully much better than the other products that are out there. And we will dive into both a little bit more in the end, but let's talk about like some general things in the dev tooling space nowadays. So I think let's get the big elephant, like let's address it first. AI, LLMs. I think we should talk about it at least a little bit, and then we can talk about some other things. But obviously LLMs and AI in general have like a very big impact on the dev tooling space already, and it will just increase in the next couple of years. So I think I'll just like start with a couple of thoughts, and I would love to hear what you think. So, I mean, Copilot has already changed development for many engineers, and most of my friends are using it in some capacity. And it, I think on the one hand, just increases the speed, like AI generated development or AI driven development that you can like churn out code with. So speed's definitely getting better. You skip boring boilerplate code and you can focus on what matters. But on the other hand, you also introduce more challenges. And I think one of the main challenges that I hear people talking about, especially in like bigger companies, but in smaller companies, you might see it as well to some degree, is security. Because security teams have already been overwhelmed with the speed at which the product is changing and like new stuff is being put out. And now if the speed further accelerates, it might even be more difficult to actually get on top of like all the changes, to stay on top there. And also like AI generated code might have some unique attack vectors that we aren't even aware of now, especially like once it gets like more and more automated over time. But yeah, maybe let's talk about the AI driven stuff. How do you view it, maybe on a macro level, and then how do you think about it at Resend, maybe?
Yeah, one quick question about, you're just saying how you're using Copilot. Can I ask you like, how are you using to like as a prompt and you say, hey, like write a function that does X and returns Y, or is it more like an autocomplete?
I think like I see people using both. For me personally, I'm currently not shipping that much code anymore. I've like shifted more to the other side, but when I do it, I sometimes do autocomplete and I sometimes do like prompt-based stuff. Prompt-based stuff sometimes just helps me think through how I would structure something. And also if it's like boilerplate, sometimes I just don't want to write it. And I just want to get the structure, and then I like just change the variables or whatever I have to adapt. And Copilot is obviously just one example. One of my other favorite examples is, it's not necessarily like super deep code, but I dislike writing SQL. So whenever I write SQL, whether it's like for Fastgen or something else, I have ChatGPT open in one window, and then I have Fastgen, for example, open in the other window. And it's just much faster and more accurate SQL code than what I could produce on my own in such a short amount of time. So, but I'm also not a full-time engineer anymore, right? I'm the CEO, so it's a bit different for me than it is for our engineers or for some of the engineers that I know in bigger teams.
Yeah, I asked that question because I feel like when I think about AI, I think about what are the use cases, and instead of just I feel like most people, they see that topic and they're like, oh, I need to get into that bandwagon. Like, this is the new trend, this is the hype. I need to surf that wave together. And I would challenge folks to just take a step back and think about, okay, what exactly are we trying to solve? Are we trying to help folks as they're developing, and then we autocomplete, and depending on, you know, what they have already built, we enhance that? Or are we trying to help from like the ideation process? And for Resend specifically, we have tons of ideas on how we can approach it externally and internally. Externally, we have ideas of, like, as you're composing an email, you can like give a subject line, and based on that subject line, we can generate the whole email. Or the opposite, like you write the whole email and then you're like, oh, I wish I could have like 3 or 4 subject lines that are going to convert better. They're going to have more open rates and click-through rates. Okay,
I need
generate.
That. I need that. Every time I write emails, I finish my email, and then the last thing I'm like, wait, I need a subject line. That happens to me like 3 times a week, probably, at least, probably more.
Exactly. So I feel like there are a lot of use cases like that. And the way I think about it, and I'm sure like you've been through that experience where during our batch, we had tons of AI companies. And, you know, this next batch, man, I don't even know the percentage. It's just like
looks
tons.
like 70. Looks like 70%
wow.
to me. Like, just not it's not an official figure. That's just like my eye test from what I see out there.
Yeah. So the challenging thing is, like, why are you building a company that isn't on that space? Is because you're trying to surf the wave, or is it because you're trying to solve a real problem? And, you know, here on my side, I'm dealing with this super archaic technology. Email is not sexy, it's not exciting as AI, but it's a problem that people still have, even like 20, 30 years since email, you know, first appeared. So I like thinking about how can we make something that already exists even better?
Yeah.
How can we push that line?
I like that. And I think there's like just like a paradigm shift in terms of how software can be developed, right? I totally agree with you that, like, if you just say the buzzword AI, there's like multiple ways how you can think about it. You can think about it as, do I want to build a company in that space? Your answer was no. Our answer was no. But then you can also think about it in terms of, how can it make our own product better, potentially? You just made some examples on your end. We actually have some LLM-driven features that we will ship pretty soon as well, because it can enhance the product experience in specific areas, even though your main focus might not be it. And then the last part of it is, okay, I'm building a product, like I'm shipping code, I'm making something. How can I use this new technology to my advantage when I'm building my own thing? And there, like Copilot, for example, would be something, or just having ChatGPT open. Like one example is, like, we just give everyone ChatGPT Pro access in the company, just because we think it's worth it, in contrast to like where you would spend money otherwise. But yeah, I think there was like a pretty good summary on the AI stuff. There's maybe like bottle that for today. Maybe it comes up at a later date, but it's like there's probably like 20 AI webinars happening just right now.
For sure.
Let's talk about a couple of other things. And one of the things that I think that I have heard a lot from different companies, especially also from bigger companies, is that there is an increasing focus on developer productivity, especially since companies need to cut costs, right? Like Series B, C stage companies, but also like enterprise companies, but like Series B, C are really like hit pretty hard. And usually engineering is not hit as hard by direct cost cutting. Like usually like marketing or like back office or like other things are hit first. But at the same time, companies are very conscious about the output that is generated from the engineering cost center, right? Because it's growing proportionally over time. And I just wanted to hear whether you've seen that as well, whether you've encountered it. How do you see people cope with that? Like, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I love that term, developer productivity, because it speaks to not the cost associated with maintaining a server, but like how can you really extract the best out of like 1 hour from an engineer? You know, we all know that engineering salaries are super high and we need to maximize their productivity, right? For me, a big inspiration is when I look at Vercel and their pricing structure. So you think of Vercel and you think about this company that helps you, deploy and host your applications. So from a very simplistic way, I know they do way more and they are way more sophisticated, but let's just put Vercel in this hosting company bucket. You can think of that as, okay, if you're building a hosting company, you're probably going to charge by storage, memory, transfer in and out of data, CPU, all that kind of stuff. But no, they charge per seat because they know that what they're solving is not like how much data is being transferred or how many people are accessing your website. They're like, we care about the load. From like, it doesn't matter if it's one person accessing the website or 2 million. They care about like making the developers more productive. And I feel like there's something really unique about that angle. And that changes the conversation because now engineering is not a commodity anymore. Cloud computing is not a commodity. It's like putting the engineers on the driver's seat. And I feel like for a long time, engineers there were only the ones that would influence the buyer decision, but now they're the ones making that buyer decision. And that changes the whole scenario.
And that is a very good point that actually transitions me to another thought that I had. And this is like it's not a 2023 thing, but I think it's getting more and more important. It's the way the buyers are changing, which you just mentioned. And like back in the day, you just sold to C-level people, right? Then like it transitioned a little bit. You could sell to managers. Now you have the PLG world where individual developers sign up for your product, maybe test it out for free, and then at some point want to use it in their company like for real. And then you like upsell them, or they even approach you and ask you, how can we integrate this at our company? We would need this or that. So, and from my understanding, that's also what Resend does, right? You have like some kind of free tier. You want people to be able to try it out and then be delighted by like the experience, and then like use it for more robust use cases over time. And that brings a lot of, as you said, it brings the idea of the developer just being the execution, like the hand that actually carries it out, to like more to the brain a little bit. It's not a perfect analogy, but I think it just changes a lot of things and has for the like last decade or so. So how does this change the way you approach your go-to-market and just your overall strategy?
Changes dramatically because now the way we build our product, like every little interaction needs to be perfect and it needs to delight folks. Because if you're playing that PLG game where you want to target like a large base of developers, maybe there's some CTOs that are also playing with your product. They have like 1 hour in the weekend. Maybe they're like 30 to 35 years old and their kid is running around in the like living room. And they're like, oh yeah, I've been hearing about this Fastgen thing. Let me just play around for like 15 minutes. That's all I have. I'm just like doing other stuff. And if they start playing around and they hit like the smallest friction point, now you're delaying their whole experience. Like they're going to be like, okay, yeah, like this is not as good as I thought, And it's not like they're going to forget about your product forever, but they're going to delay that decision like maybe 6 months later. So it's important that you make sure like your product is frictionless because you want folks to have a good experience. And when they're ready, you want them to like sign up with their Gmail accounts and play around with stuff, use for their side projects. And then maybe 3 months from now, 6 months from now, 3 years from now, maybe they say, oh, you know what, I've been using this product. When they have the need, you're going to be like the number one option on their mind. And if other folks on the team also use it, they'll be like, oh yeah, I've used this too. Oh yeah, this is great. Oh yeah, okay, now we have a consensus. Let's just use this thing. That's the default in the industry right now. That's how we try to position ourselves. But it's very hard to build a product that doesn't have those flaws, right? Like, because you have to keep constantly like,
Yeah, it's rough, because on the other hand, you also want to launch quickly, right? You don't want to like, that's the whole YC credo, right? Like launch quickly, launch something that you're not proud of, which kind of goes against what you just said, that like you need to delight at every point. And this is a debate we constantly have internally, because I think if you're in the dev tooling space, your product has to pass a higher bar of quality than it would in many other stages, because developers, when they sign up for your product, they always see the small mistakes. They always think, oh, I could have built this better. Oh, and you need to like hit a certain level with them that is just much higher than for other people. Similar to if you sell like, I don't know. Okay, let's just use like a sports analogy. If you sell like running shoes to like a casual runner who runs like once a week, versus you sell it to a professional like Olympic athlete, very, very different, or like just a professional athlete in general, like very different way of looking at the product. And like similarly, developers who understand your like what you're building a bit better, you need to delight them a bit more. By the way, like good tangent. I talked to someone earlier today who just became a Resend customer 2 or 3 days ago, and they talked about like some kind of like nice icon interaction that they had. I don't know specifically what it was, but the first thing they said was not, oh yeah, it solved my problem in that way, because like they probably could have used a different product, right? Just if it's about sending out emails. But they specifically talked about the fact that they loved something about the way the icons hover. Do you know what I'm talking about? Because I don't.
Yeah. So, and I love that analogy that you're just describing, because I think I read a blog post one day about how building a product for developers, like you being a chef and you're cooking for other Michelin
that's way better.
star chefs.
I like that. Yeah, that's good.
Because like the bar is so high, and for you to even meet that bar, it requires a tremendous amount of work. For you to challenge that market and say, you know what, we're not just going for like being at that bar, we want to raise that bar. That's a totally different game to play, and requires just like an unbelievably like high focus on and a lot of hours, literally. Like there's no way around it. The icons specifically, that it's funny that you bring it up, because I remember like one of the MVPs of the product were like, oh, this sidebar is so boring, like there's nothing about this sidebar that is cool. So we're like, oh, let's add some animated icons. And it's the silliest thing ever, and everybody notices because it sends a message. It's the same reason why we have a Rubik's Cube on our landing page. It sends a message that, hey, we care about the details, we care about technical excellence, and if you care about this too, this is the place for you. So you can have like 4 paragraphs, you can write 10 blog posts about it, but you have to demonstrate. And these little things, they compound. And I feel like the sum of all these details is what makes a great product. And people typically just like say, oh yeah, you know, forget about the details, this is not as important. And then I see it as almost like a stare, you know, like oh, a small detail, oh, this is nice, oh, this is cool. Boom, you have a nice brand, you have a product that people love. The opposite is like, oh, okay, there's a bug, oh, there's a typo in the UI, oh, this could be better. And then you try to integrate and then it fails. Like, oh man, I don't know if I want to play around with this. And you lose that opportunity. So it's tricky, man. It's tricky. Yeah. How do you deal with that? Like that tension of like shipping fast and making sure you delight your users. It's so difficult, right?
It is a constant struggle, and it's very different than the last company that we were building, because there we had to ship very slow because we are very regulated in the fintech space. And now product velocity is very important to us, so we ship really fast. And that's also one of the first things that people tell us, that they're just, especially the ones who have used the product like 2 months ago and like use it again now, like how many things we are like shipping and how fast it is. Best example, we just shipped our Resend integration like as one of the features.
Love
But
it.
I think it's a constant tension that you have, because the other problem that you have is if you add lots of things quickly, the likelihood that some things break is also higher, right? So like how much do you actually want to test? And like testing is very important, right? But like how fast do you want to go? Because like going fast is very important to get where you want to be, because you have this like vision of your product, right? You want to build the Stripe or like the Vercel for email, and you have like a good foundation, but to get there, there's so many things you have to build. But at the same time, you want to have this like delighted person who uses it right now. And what we noticed is like, of course, it has to work. So we just need to ensure that the like basic functionality is there. So I think the thing that annoys me personally the most is like usually when we like didn't do a test properly and then like didn't notice something and then something small breaks or something. That's usually something that I don't like. But you just need to get better at it over time. And then similar to what you said, like we try to build these like small details into it that just make it nicer. Like one great example is like we have this debugging mode in Fastgen where you can go through the visual API. And one of the first things we did was like color code it so that you see if it's green, like all the action blocks are green, then it went through. If there's a red icon somewhere, then it stopped. And the yellow icon basically means it kind of went through, but there was something that was tricky. And this is what people like, I think so far had loved the most. It's like we could have done the same thing without the color coding, and we actually tried that out. But this like just adding this like additional like signaling color has improved the perception of the feature by a lot without actually changing how it works. And then we have like confetti that pops out when someone signs up, which is like pretty small, but people like it. And I like that when like other tools like do these small things. So I think it's just a constant struggle, and you have to find the right balance, because if you go too slow, that's not good for the company, but going too fast is also not good for the company. So what is the actual correct speed? No one knows, but you just have to decide like for your company what you think the right speed is. And it's a constant, in our case, it's like a constant iterative process.
Yeah, there's so much responsibility as a CEO to make sure you're pointing the team in the right direction, right? Because like it takes a lot of time to build something. There's the opportunity cost of, if you're saying yes to something, you're saying no to 10 other things. Yeah. So it requires a lot of conviction, which not always we have all the data, not always we have all the right, data points, but you make a call and then you go. And
exactly. How do you, maybe before we jump to the next topic, like how do you make the calls internally? Do you have like a framework that you go through, like weighted by, like what we sometimes do, especially like for bigger features, is we look at the impact, like how important would it be? We look at the reach, how many people would be affected by it, and then how quickly can we build it? But sometimes it's just this gut feeling.
Yeah, exactly. That you can't really, like, there's no formula for that, right? Yeah. I would say at this stage, so I've worked at a really big enterprise company like you did, and I had like all these different, and I tried like 3 or 4 different prioritization frameworks. We had RISE, we had like all these things. And at Resend, I don't feel like we still need that kind of format necessarily. We're such a small team, we're 4 people. So like there's no point in doing that. But what we do is like, we make sure that we are always launching, and the way we think about it is almost like a heartbeat. So we need like these small launches to make sure that to send a message, hey, we're alive, we're here, we're still shipping. But we also need like the big jumps. And the one we did today with the fundraising, that's a big jump. The Hacker News launch, product hunt, and then a launch week. So like you need both, and that's super tricky too, because if you're constantly shipping And then like, how do you build a backlog for the big ones? If
Yeah.
you just do the big ones and you're like 3 months and there's nothing on your change log, then it's like, what are you even doing, right? So
yeah. We actually have the rule, like even if we just publish like small changes, because sometimes small changes are more important than big changes, right? They could
That's
be,
true.
they could very well be. But we have the rule that we need to publish like change logs at least once a month, even if there's not like a big bang. And sometimes
Nice.
we do like I think last month we did like, I don't even know, like hundreds of small changes, but we didn't really have these like super big features that were very announcement worthy, right? So like we changed the change log a little bit, and then like we like pushed it live once like we had like some like more like bigger features, but the bulk of it, like 90% of the actual improvements, were in the lots of lines below the change log, where we just had all these small things. But without getting too much into DevTool founder therapy right now, which is usually something that people also really enjoy, especially if they watch it on YouTube afterwards. Let's maybe talk for like about like 1 or 2 other things that might be interesting. And one thing that I wanted to talk about, which goes a little bit in the Resend direction, which is the thing that I've noticed, is this rethinking of like old paradigms with like developer-centric software. Because if someone would have asked me before I met you, actually like not that long ago, right? Do we need a new developer-centric email tool? My answer probably would have been yes and no at the same time. Oh, sorry. Because on the one hand, like the current solutions aren't just like, they're just not there where they should be, especially if you compare it to a Stripe, right? Where I worked for a while. And maybe one quick anecdote from Stripe, because like I've worked at like especially on the freelance space for like all these different software companies. And then at Stripe, I did like some product work, but also some growth work for like the European market. And like selling Stripe was probably like the easiest sell I ever had, just because the product is so good compared to like selling a product that's not as good. But basically, how does it work if you have this like almost like, let's say, archaic thing, right? Email, right? It has been here for so long, especially if you think about like software context, right? Because frameworks change, basically, like languages change, like all these things change, but email has stayed. How do you approach such a juggernaut, like from a like building perspective and like rebuilding it? Because people are used to this, right? They have been using it their whole lives.
Yeah, let me tell you a story. Did I tell you about the first time I applied to IC?
I think you might have, but let's repeat it for the people here.
So in 2020, for me, like being an entrepreneur meant that I had to come up with this new idea that no one in the world had. It needs to be like an innovation, right? That's why you create a startup. That's the definition of a startup. So one day I was at the supermarket, and you know that wine app called Vivino, where you scan the bottle of wine. And then I was using that to scan like and find the best wine. And I was like buying cheese to eat with the wine. And I was like, oh, I wish there was an app that I could scan my cheeses. So I went back home, and then I searched on App Store, and I couldn't find it. And I was like, oh yeah, boom. That light bulb moment, I'm going to build this. And I built it. I didn't know anything about mobile. I've been doing web for 12 years. I didn't know anything about B2C, but I was like, okay, let's do it. And I definitely didn't know anything about the food industry. So I built that app, and then I applied to IC. And I got rejected right away. There was not even like a conversation, an interview, nothing. I went through the whole like startup school thing, didn't work out. And, fast forward to 2023, I'm like, man, I'm struggling with email. I was paying $150 for MailChimp for like broadcast type of emails. I was paying $50 for Mailgun for inbound emails. And I was using Postmark at work, which we are having all sorts of problems. So I'm like, man, like I'm using all these tools and I don't like any of them. Like maybe they're good for a specific persona, like a product marketer or a product manager. But as an engineer, as a software developer, this doesn't feel right. It doesn't sit well with me. So Boo and I were working at WorkOS back then, and we're like, oh man, let's see if we could create this type of email or the versatility of email. How would that look like? Just like as a thought exercise. So we started building, and we're like, oh, okay, oh, I think we have something. But the whole thing about like doing that, and when I applied, we got in, I was like, oh my gosh, I can't even believe, was because like I was playing at my own strengths. So I knew how to build stuff for developers. I've been doing that for a long time, doing plenty of open source projects. I knew B2B, and I knew, what developers need, like, because I'm a developer myself. And I feel like people underestimate the power of solving, and there's some problems that you assume they're solved. Like, oh, sending email, that's a solved problem. Sending SMS or push notification, that's a solved problem. But is it in 2023? Is it really, with serverless, lambdas, cloud functions, edge functions, with React, with Tailwind? These are all things that came up like the last few years, right? And these companies that started in 2008, 2009, they didn't really catch up to what's happening in the web community. And there's this whole generation of developers that are coming in, they're doing boot camps and coming to the market, and all they know is React. They don't know JavaScript or how to do a query selector in the DOM. They don't know what the DOM is.
Yeah, I've noticed that.
And that's totally fine. That's not a problem.
Of course.
Because as we grow as an industry, we keep like leveling up in terms of the abstraction layer.
We're not using punch cards anymore. Like,
exactly.
I couldn't do that.
So that's how I think about it. Like, if you really take a step back and you're like, oh, okay, there's this problem that everyone assumes that it's solved. How can I do something that is like different, like using the new stuff? And you might as well find something that, oh, actually, this specific problem no one solved. And maybe the angle that you approach it is unique too. Like, we spend a lot of time building brand. And that's another thing that developers underestimate the power of. They're just like, oh, I'm just going to push this repo to GitHub. And that's no, like, you need a README, you need a website, you need amazing docs. Like, it doesn't end when you push the code. It only starts when you push the code. So I feel like that's a different way of thinking about it.
Yeah, I agree. And like our origin story is like similar to some degree, where we were building our last startup, and the regulation changed. So we sold the assets last year. And then we are thinking about, what are we building next? And what we struggled with, we built so many different products in the fintech because we had so many different stakeholders. And we saw all these like pretty decent tools to like build front ends really quickly, like Webflow, for example, Flutterflow for mobile, like just things that make you much faster than if you build everything on your own. And sometimes you need that, right? If it's not like if it's not something that like needs to be like extremely super sophisticated from the very beginning, then that's perfect. But we didn't find anything where you could like have like similar speed increases for your backend. And we just thought, well, this should exist. So we started like thinking about how it would look like, especially with like technologies that you would use nowadays. How could it be super fast and still just save developers time? And that's how we came up with Fastgen. And it's also like an iterative process of how you get there, right? Because I assume your first idea of Resend looked very different than, or at least to some degree different than what it is right now. At least it's definitely the case in Fastgen's case, where we just like explore and develop and evolve over time. But yeah, I think that was very, very helpful. One of the other things that I think I'm a bit biased there, but I do think that low-code tools specifically will be increasingly important for developers. And I think the big change there is, like, for example, Retool has done it really well, right? Retool, like, very impressive company, and they have made it so easy to build these like internal tools and just like have this like layer on top of your data and just make it much, much faster for developers all over the world to build these tools that they didn't really want to build before. And now it's just like, I don't know, it could be 100 times faster depending on what you're doing. And I think there's like similar things that we are trying to tackle in the low-code space, where developers sometimes prefer to write code, but it really depends on what they're doing. Because sometimes they just want to like provide business value, right? That's what they're ultimately measured by. It's not about how many lines of code you ship. It's, do you solve the problem that we currently have with your technical skills? And then the way of solving it doesn't really matter. And I think that's like a shift that has happened over the last technically 10 years, but I think the last couple of years, like especially with tools like Retool, etc., have been pretty strong, where you can abstract away, like we have reached a technical level where you can abstract away some complexity and still make it flexible enough for developers to inject code when they want to inject it and just build what they actually want to build. And I think this whole rise of like more visual stuff combined with actual code will be super important. But I'm also biased because like I'm building something in that space, right? Because I believe in that actually happening.
But that's just a comment about that. That's so true. And as developers, we have this fixation with scaling, right? We're like, oh, from day one, I need the most scalable solution ever. I don't know why we have this thing. Maybe because we grew up in this generation where people would build, they would go from an MVP to a super successful company with millions of users, like the Web 2.0 type of era. But the reality is you're probably going to ship your V1. No one will care. Few people months later are going to keep iterating. And to even tackle the scalability problem, like it's a luxury to tackle that. Most people, they die. Most companies, they die before they reach that possibility to tackle that problem. So I feel like low code, no code solutions, they can speed up that iteration process, figure out what you want to do. Maybe they could be like your whole solution forever, right? Like, if it's it's powerful enough too.
And that's the other part, right? Because many engineers always think, well, we need scalability here and there, but then their own stuff isn't necessarily that scalable often. So sometimes like abstracting DevOps away, for example, like is a huge part where you just focus on like serverless, right? You mentioned it earlier. That can actually help you sometimes because you don't make rookie mistakes when it comes to like deploying your servers or something like that. But yeah, overall, I think there's so many interesting areas in where you can provide value for developers, because we haven't really talked about that in the beginning, but software is still eating the world. And who is actually building all these things is developers, right? There's more and more developers. And even though there have been these headlines like, will we even need developers now with LLMs? I think that's like the biggest bullshit I've seen in quite a while. Especially since, like, in my mind, we need more developers than before, because there's like more stuff that actually needs to be built, more software that needs to be maintained, and just more opportunities to actually generate value. So I think new technologies, usually have the after effect of needing more people who actually take care of them versus the other way around. So I think the interesting thing about the space is just that it has been growing so quickly, but it's still continuing to grow globally, like in all these different companies. And the only thing you need to do is like look into an actual like traditional large enterprise. And I'm not talking about like Google or Apple here. I'm talking about manufacturing company that was founded in the 1800s. Just see how digitized they are already. And all of them have engineering departments by now, but they usually are not as important as they should be. And that is already changing, right? All of those companies, even if software is not their main product, like a manufacturing company, right? It's not their main product, but they're thinking more and more about how to inject it into different areas. Sometimes it's like back office, sometimes it's internal stuff, but then also it gets more and more into the manufacturing process, into the logistics, into the supply chain. So basically it's just injected in every single piece of every company more and more. And actually email is like a great thing there, because I don't know a single company that doesn't use email. So I think you never had an issue with market size, I would say.
Yeah, let's hope so.
Well, I'm pretty bullish on that. Did you bring any topic that we haven't touched today? Is there anything that you would still like to mention, or anything that you think is worth talking about?
No, I feel like this was a great conversation. Just wanted to thank you again, Mike, for putting this together. I'm really excited about what you guys are building, and I'm excited to see where both of us will continue to build, and what both of us will continue to understand, and what people that are listening to this will also build. So yeah, feel free to share with us the stuff that you come up with. I'd love to check it out.
Yeah, and if you see this on YouTube, again, like, reach out to us as well. Like, if you have anything exciting, any additional questions, if anyone here who's currently here has a question, feel free to put it in. Maybe we find like a minute to answer it. But I think we should just do this again in like 12 months and see what we've built and how far we've come. But yeah, ultimately, thanks for taking the time, especially on such a busy day, right? Because you just announced your round earlier today. Good announcement, I would say, by the way. Nice. Multi-channel. I saw that you put effort into it. That was pretty cool. And yeah, thanks for sharing your wisdom with us. Happy building, and look forward to seeing what you ship next, especially since our users are using Resend now as well. And whenever someone asks me which email integration to use, I'll point them very, very directly into the right direction.
Awesome. Thanks a lot, Mike. Thanks, everybody.
Great. Have a good rest of your day. Bye-bye.
You too. See ya.